what point do you think people get sick and tired of the fact that I'm like a student in an English class who didn't do the reading for a book review and watch the movie instead because I constantly refer to characters by their actors' names instead of by the characters' names?
I think, honestly, I think it's if you're watching this and you don't know who these actors are and you're a fan of this movie, I'll be surprised.
Oh, I just meant broadly in general, right?
Like if you're a John Carpenter fan and he uses the same actors in almost every movie, like several times these actors will come back and come back and come back, you probably know who Keith David is.
That's the only way you know they're not dead.
It's true. Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Yes. No, I think it'll be easy enough to follow. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the second ever Patron Produced Grimdark Media. If anything was ever going to say that the patrons are our people, it would be that this was the first film they ever picked.
Yeah.
You know, like when you know, like you're surrounded by.
Do I belong here? Am I supposed to be at this party?
Am I supposed to be at this party?
Yeah, I'm supposed to be at this party.
This was like, and also all three of the top picks for this. Like, I would have been fine with any of them.
Yeah,
to be honest,
we
I
talked
would have
about
been
this 2
completely
weeks
fine
ago.
with any of them. But they chose John Carpenter's 1982 opus and also spectacular box office failure, The Thing. Almost cost him his career making movies.
And just to clarify, John Carpenter's The Thing, not Howard Hughes's
The Thing from
Another World.
Yeah, okay. Well, set on opposite poles, as you trivia pointed out to me. The other contenders were Dread and Akira, which I thought was
still got to do
cool.
both of those at some
point.
point.
And both of those, they're definitely going to happen. But we had a laundry list of the top 25 things that we thought they would want to pick from, and these ones were absolutely at the top of the pile. But it was neck and neck at the end. Like it was almost Dread. It was very close.
Which would have been
equally perfect. Yeah, absolutely. So if you've never watched this before, this is our Grimdark Media show where we break down pieces of things that we think qualify as grim and dark. We have an entire video basically going through what we think the elements of that are. And every element doesn't necessarily show up in every piece of media, but every piece of media has at least some of these elements in them. And we go through, we talk about this thing in I said the thing.
The thing in the thing?
The thing in the thing. And we break it down.
We're like your elderly aunt and uncle trying to explain something right now. You know the thing and the thing.
But this is film, so this restarts the cycle. So this is why we had two back-to-back. The patrons picked Range of Shadow Deep for game last cycle, and this cycle they are picking the piece of film media, so they picked The Thing. You get to pick the literature piece this time. Like it's not going to make sense. We're not gonna be able to do it in a way that we go back and forth doing different things every time because the patron's always gonna pick one. So we'll just take whatever one we didn't do.
I am super excited because we'll come to it at the end, but I had to bail on what my original choice was. I came up with another choice that I think is going to be really cool.
Well, I haven't heard this yet, so I'm excited. Yeah. And then I get to pick the piece of game media for this month, which I will also reveal at the end of this whole thing. So let's do a little bit of trivia for The Thing. You're going
to have to stop referring to things that we're talking about as things.
I know. This is going to be difficult. So this is 1982's The Thing, this is my collector's edition, The Ultimate and Alien Terror. Not the 2016, 15?
2011, I think, actually.
Really?
I think it's older than you think it is.
It must be. Oh, right, because this is right after Scott Pilgrim. 2010.
2010.
Oh, my God. I saw this in Fremont, California in a movie theater.
So while we're
with two other people.
So while we're talking about dates.
Yeah.
And you were mentioning the fact that The Thing was a major box office bomb, which it was.
Sure was.
Do you know what other sci-fi movie came out the exact same day as The Thing?
Oh, I have this in my trivia notes.
Oh, there you go.
I have this in my trivia notes. So let's do some trivia. So trivia about The Thing. John Carpenter has said this is the favorite of all of his films he's ever made.
And also the first of his unofficial Apocalypse trilogy.
That's right, yeah.
Which we should watch all three movies.
I think all of them will qualify because it's also... whatchamacallit? It's also
Prince of Darkness.
Prince of Darkness, which is one of my favorites.
And In the Mouth of Madness, which is one of my favorites.
I don't know how They Live doesn't get into that list, though, because it's also kind of an apocalypse movie. It's like an alien apocalypse. I guess it's not purely end of the world. Anyway, dithering. Every year on the 21st of June, which is the middle of winter in Antarctica, the British Antarctic Expedition watches this movie in full, which I think is an incredible piece of trivia. Yep. Imagine being in Antarctica and watching this movie. Unused music from Ennio Morricone's score for this movie was later used in 2015's The Hateful Eight, which I think is incredible.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Also a winter, like, locked in the ice isolation movie. I also love The Hateful Eight. Underrated, I think.
I'm actually using that as a structure for a D&D adventure I'm writing right now.
Oh, I mean, it's not to have our sidetracks, but it's basically and then there was none. Yeah, and I mean, it's a murder mystery. It's like an Agatha Christie.
Yeah, it's an Agatha Christie,
which I think is fantastic. The interior LA sets were refrigerated down to 40 Fahrenheit when it was 100 Fahrenheit outside. So it cost, apparently their power bill for making this movie in California was incredible because it was the middle of summer when they're shooting all these like freezing cold scenes. The movie bombed in '82 so hard that the studio canceled Carpenter's multi-picture deal. After Halloween, he had a 3-picture deal and it got canceled.
You know, it's funny, and this feels like the reason why, like, you've got famous actors and directors and writers, but why you don't have a ton of famous studio execs. Can you imagine being the person who made the financially responsible but artistically bankrupt decision that John Carpenter, that guy doesn't have any more good movies in him.
So, like,
he's done.
Well, Halloween was made for a budget of $375,000. This had a $15 million budget. So, like, I understand the difference and the return difference. But in Carpenter's defense, the week before this movie came out, E.T. launched.
And the day this movie came out,
Blade Runner came out. Could you imagine? Like, so fucking poor Carpenter.
One of the things my wife and I were talking about, right, is because when you watch a 40-year-old movie, you have to look at like effects shots and stuff through the lens of this is a 40-year-old movie. And I honestly think the practical effects hold up really well.
Oh, 100%. There's only one bad effect, I think, in the entire movie.
If you're calling it a sci-fi movie and putting it next to Blade Runner as a visual piece on the same day.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's a
lot harder when the opening shot is the world's worst animated flying saucer versus the pan over post-apocalyptic cyberpunk LA.
Which is funny because the flying saucer was like, as I understand it, his one artistic compromise, because the only reason that shot is in there is an homage to the thing from another world. Yep. It's not meant to be part of the narrative in any way. At all.
And also you have no context for it because it's supposed to be 100,000 years before the movie takes place. This thing's crashing into the ice, right?
Wait, a thing crashes into the ice?
It does. At about 14 minutes, one of the bush pilots flying a helicopter in the movie, when they take off to go to the Norwegian camp, actually gives the controls to Kurt Russell, who is learning to be a helicopter pilot, and you can see the thing like this. It wobbles and almost tips over, which I think is very funny. The movie was filmed in Stewart, British Columbia, so it has a Canadian connection for us, which is fantastic. And the remains of Outpost 31 are still there, burned down. Occasionally, people will go and retrieve chunks of it for their memorabilia. People will hike into this like bush camp where this place was built, and pieces of the helicopter are still there, and they'll like steal them for their like memorabilia.
Yeah, so they left it like that.
I think it's very cool.
Because the way they shot the movie was the opening of the movie when they go to the Norwegian camp, instead of building a second set, they filmed the whole movie and then used the burned down Outpost set. 31 as the set for the Norwegian camp.
It's a full loop. The voice of the chess computer is an uncredited Adrienne Barbeau cameo, who is Carpenter's wife.
At the time.
None of you watching this will be of an age to know who Adrienne Barbeau was, but she was basically like a sex icon of like the 70s and 80s.
So, and it's funny because she was his wife, he was able to use her in post for a lot of his movies. So like she's in Escape from New York, right?
Yeah.
But her death scene, because I guess it didn't turn out when they originally filmed it or they didn't like it, her death scene was filmed in their garage at home.
That's so funny.
Months after the movie was shot.
That's so funny. And then my last piece of trivia is Keith David. This is his first ever credited piece of media. This is his, as you put it earlier, this is his Die Hard to Alan Rickman. This is his Die Hard to Alan Rickman.
Yeah. And I got to say, and I don't know why this will never stop being a problem for me. I've had 40 years to learn and unlearn this. I don't know why I can't stop mixing up Keith David and David Keith. Those two actors are nothing alike. They are not the same person.
No, not the same person.
But I will freely interchange those two names. And can I throw? I know I mentioned this to you at the start. I'm going to throw in my personal piece of trivia, which I mentioned to you before we started recording.
Which makes you sad.
It doesn't make me sad. It makes me angry. It makes me super duper angry.
Sorry, go on.
So I have discovered in the last few months that Wilfred Brimley is my portrait of Dorian Gray. And I don't know how that happened. So for anybody
you need some Walter glasses.
For anybody who's watching this right now, who can see my face right now as we sit here recording this, As we sit here recording this, I am 3 years older than Wilfred Brimley was in The Thing. And now my back hurts.
Wilfred Brimley, who is an absolute treasure throughout this entire movie.
48 years old in this
48
movie.
years old in this
48
movie. Yeah.
years old.
And a hero throughout the entire thing.
I'm all better now.
I'm all better now. So it's time to
come inside.
I'm all better now. And if there's something wrong with me, it's all done. I'd like to come inside now. I hear things. I hear funny things outside. So it's time to get our parkas on. It's almost the first damn week of winter. And actually, it's the third damn week.
Is this literally the first time we've ever recorded one of these things where we're both sitting here in short sleeves?
And it's the first damn week of winter.
We are not. No, we're not good at this performative YouTube thing at all. This is anti-cosplay.
So we have to get into our I guess not Chinook helicopter. It's a Jet Ranger helicopter. We have to fly out to Stewart and I guess set up camp for some Arctic research because it's time for Bon Voyage.
What the hell are they researching?
Pack your bags and chew off your fingers. It's time for Bon Voyage.
Science, man. It's science. It's time to science the science. I don't know, like how long does concrete take to break down? So, side note, if you haven't seen this before, Bon Voyage is where we spoil absolutely everything. So either go get your Alan Dean Foster novelization of this and read through it real fast, because I own that. And if you want to know what the science they're doing, go read Alan Dean Foster's novelization of this, because it's tremendous. It also gives you way more background and insight into all of like the motivations of everybody. And before VHS home rental, novelizations were how you watched the movie once it left theaters, because there was no way to see it. If a movie left theaters, you didn't see the movie anymore. And so I own the novelization of this movie because they are a thing that happened in like the 60s, 70s, and 80s that I'm obsessed with.
And he was the guy who did the novelizations for everything. Because he did the novelizations for Aliens. Like if you went into, or Alien, sorry. If you went into any convenience store in the 80s, the spinner rack was all Alan Dean Foster novelizations of whatever movie.
You know what one he didn't do and that I didn't realize was a novelization? 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Really?
Yeah, that's not actually a novel that was adapted into a film. That they got Arthur C. Clarke to do the novelization.
I had no idea
of the screenplay.
Oh wow!
Blew my mind when I learned that the 2001: A Space Odyssey, because it was one of the best-selling books.
Yeah. In
science fiction in that period.
I didn't realize that.
No, he helped write the screenplay with Stanley Kubrick, and so that novel is a novelization of a movie.
Crazy.
Broke my brain when I learned that. How far off of
What are we doing?
Are we now?
What are we talking about?
So this is where we spoil everything. This is where I'm going to syllabize the 3 acts of this film. We're going to talk about the major beats of the story, and you get an overview of what this is. If you haven't seen this movie before, go watch it right now. If you're watching this somehow and haven't seen The Thing, just...
Yeah, what are you doing with your life?
Yeah, what's
going on?
What's
going on, friends?
Just do better. So our shot. Oh, and also, I got really confused because I discovered later that there is a TV adaptation, a U.S. TV adaptation of this that has extra scenes in it.
Yeah, you were telling me that
which
this morning,
which neither of us had seen, but I think is the version I watched over and over again, recorded off City TV late movies. Which is the first time I watched this in 1988. I stayed up late and watched this off Great Movies on City TV. For all you Canadians who know what that is, that's when R-rated movies after 9
City
o'clock
TV
shows.
everywhere.
You could do, God, rest his soul. I love that guy. So the shot opens. This is the most probably famous shot of this film, to a dog running across the ice in an Arctic wasteland, Antarctic in this case wasteland, and we get. It actually opens to Ennio Morricone's incredible score to this movie, which I should probably put before everything else. It is a metronomic heartbeat. I find the sound incredibly soothing, but it is the most understated, keening, low-tempo score I think possible.
It's also interesting because at its time, it makes this feel the least like any other John Carpenter movie, because it's the first John Carpenter movie I remember seeing that he didn't score.
He scored all of his movies himself, and Ennio Morricone does this one. He almost wins a Razzie for it because everyone hates it, and then goes on to win an Oscar, get nominated for Oscars later on. He becomes incredibly famous as a composer. One of the most iconic things I think about this movie is the score and the soundtrack. The sound design and score in this film are incredible.
Everything about the sound in this movie is like... to have a movie where every moment, every sound in the movie, whether it's the music or the background, is completely thought out. It's amazing.
And I would say that this movie probably wouldn't be as good without the score to it. The isolation and the low impact dread created by the music, dum dum is incredible. And it alternates between feeling hypnotic and feeling like a heartbeat, which is, I think, really telling when you think about the themes of this film.
It's got a very how something can be soothing and ominous
at the same time. Yeah. And so, sorry, we actually open to a flying saucer crashing into Earth. In the worst effects shot of the entire movie, at which point, when it's competing with Blade Runner and E.T., it's got Spielberg and what's his name and Ridley Scott basically on top of it. I can see why some people were disappointed with the effects of the film.
It's a little more Mars Attacks.
It's a little more,
a little less.
Yeah, it's not
good.
Great. It's not great, but it's only the first 5 seconds of the film, and then the actual opening takes place where we see a sled dog named Jeb, apparently in real life, and the goodest boy dog actor of all time.
Again, I know it sounds like we're always fawning over this stuff. That is an unbelievably well-trained dog.
Yeah.
Not because of the things it does, but because of the things it doesn't do.
That's what I mean. It has like these incredible long shots that it's doing where there's a helicopter being timed to chase after it. And we see this helicopter basically chasing this sled dog across the ice. It's a Malamute. And you know this is an incredibly well-trained actor animal because it is being shot from very far away and doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. And Carpenter and the rest of the crew apparently also noted that this dog was like, they never worked with a dog this good ever, and the conditions were inhuman, basically. So the dog and the copter shots are really intense. They give you this sense that something's happening, but you don't really understand it. And it flies past the sign for Outpost 31. Outpost 31 being obviously a U.S. research base somewhere in Antarctica. The year's 1982. So it's the same year the movie's coming out. So it's set in present day, basically. Yeah. But I like that it says it's 1982 because I like the fact that then you understand the tech level and the dress of everyone. And they actually make a point of making sure that the prequel that's filmed in 2010 or 2009 is also set in the 80s. Yeah. And I think that makes me feel better about it because it's a period piece, not a contemporary piece. You don't have to worry about all the contemporary logic.
As an aside, I think part of the failure of the prequel movie that came out in 2010 was just the fact that I don't think it was marketed very well as being a prequel.
Yeah.
I think people went into that movie not understanding if it was a sequel, if it was a remake, and it was neither of those things.
Yeah, it's a love letter to the original.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we cut to a very heavily bearded and shaggy Kurt Russell sitting in his shack playing computer chess. And for those of you who don't know what computer chess was, this was like 1982's height of technology. Having a chess computer that you played against, it was like having 12 PS5s. This thing was probably so incredibly expensive, and he is sitting there playing chess against it. And as it puts him into checkmate, because he thinks he's got the better of it, it puts him in checkmate, and he dumps his J&B. Also, this movie is the best ad for J&B.
Yeah, it is literally the only product placement through the whole movie, but it happens once.
No, there's a Coors. There's a can of Coors.
Oh, is there a Coors?
There's a beige Coors can later on, too.
That's Coors Banquet, my
He's
friend.
watering down his J&B with Coors, his bourbon.
My God, when you're cutting whiskey with beer, just talk to somebody.
He does not follow the 24 hours to bottle to throttle rule.
I'm just saying talk to somebody.
He immediately pilots a helicopter, which you should not do when you've had half a drink. And he has been chugging J&B for a while. But he dumps it in this computer. It would be like throwing 7 PS5s off a bridge. Yeah. Like, just to put that into context, like, he destroys an incredibly expensive chess computer.
He opens the hatch on the computer.
Yeah. And dumps into the circuit board an entire glass of bourbon, basically.
Why'd that computer have a hatch on it?
For changing the boards. Because you did that back then.
I thought maybe it was where you held your ashtray.
No, man. That level of computer is kind of like having a Model T Ford. You know how to fix everything on that thing. You get sent the parts to fix everything on that thing. So once we've basically gotten to this scene, he hears the chopper coming, and we realize that not only is the chopper flying after this dog, they are shooting at it.
Yep.
And then we have the man with the worst gloves for doing this ever reach in and grab what looks like a grenade. It's a mining charge for blasting ice. And these were real things, thermite charges. They were used in geology basically to get at the rock underneath the ice when you're in like a glaciology department. And they would also be used to controlled cause avalanches so you get the side of a mountain. So this is not a weird thing for them to have grenades. They would actually have had these if they're doing a mining survey. And he is wearing the thickest possible gloves and handling these things. And I'm like, this is the one where I'm just take your gloves off, dude. Like, I know it's cold. I know you're probably going to freeze to this thing if you need to, but take your gloves off. You're handling dynamite. And he's throwing them out of the helicopter at this dog as it runs away. All the men in the outpost rush outside. They're all pulling on really heavy parkas, and you realize it is incredibly cold out. It actually was incredibly cold out. It was minus 10 Fahrenheit during most of the shooting of this, and apparently they spent $75,000 just on Arctic gear to keep the cast and crew warm.
That's funny.
Is that crazy? Well, I mean, you're talking about guys from California coming up to Stewart, British Columbia, and living in the snowfall capital of the world. So,
well, I mean, obviously they're not all super weak that way. I mean, Kurt Russell ended up spending like half his life in BC.
He did end up spending half his life. But what I mean is they are not used to this.
Oh no,
they might die by accident, right? Like they might. I'm not saying that they are weak. What I'm saying is they are unprepared for the weather here. As the chopper lands, one of the pilot goes to grab more grenades. The dog rushes towards the men, and we are brought to our first thing theory. And we're going to take breaks throughout the synopsis of this, talk about thing theories. There's a lot of fan theories about how and when people get infected. And this is thing theory number one that actually stretches all the way to the end of the movie, and we'll talk about in a second.
If we can actually just rewind just a tiny bit before we even get to that. The thing I thought was the moment I thought was interesting about this is I don't speak Norwegian.
Right.
But apparently it's not gobbledygook. So if you speak Norwegian, when this guy is yelling at our principal cast, he's just telling them straight up what is about to happen.
It's a monster. It's not a dog. Don't let it get near you. Yeah. And it's funny because all of the things he says at the end of that movie are echoed at the end of
It's McCready recording his tape.
Yeah.
Right?
Which I think is great, which I think is fantastic.
He's reciting the same monologue without even realizing it.
Yeah. So the dog runs up, and thing theory number one, this is the first moment of infection. As the dog licks Benning's face quite a bit, and then we'll need to remember this later on. And then as basically the confrontation ensues, the Norwegian pulls an assault rifle or rifle on the men, who all panic and scatter, and begins firing at the dog. It accidentally hits Bennings, who collapses. The pilot tries to throw another grenade at the dog, drops it in the snow, and blows up himself and the helicopter.
So important safety tip. When you drop a grenade, don't go digging for the live
Just
grenade.
run.
Just run away.
Just run away.
Just run away.
Just run away in the
You didn't need to be
deep
there.
snow. No, you didn't need any of that. You needed to run.
I'm sorry about your helicopter, but
Yeah. Just get the hell out of there. Also, ironically, we discover later on in the prequel that was the guy who spoke English. Of the two of them, only one of them spoke English. And so as they basically the fire of the helicopter burns, we see a man inside the base still smash a window, pull out a pistol, and shoot the shooting Norwegian. And everything kind of like calms down for a second. And part of thing theory number one, McCready hands his bottle of J&B to Bennings after checking to see if he's okay because he's been shot in the leg.
So Bennings has been licked by the dog, has an open wound.
Yeah.
And is now sharing an open bottle.
Yeah. He was licked in the face and drank an open bottle with McCready. So this is an important distinction for part of this thing.
And keep in mind that, I mean, we're going to call him Gary because apparently that's his name in the movie, but the guy cowboying it up and shooting out of the window, that is the president from Clear and Present Danger.
That is, absolutely, yes. Was he an airplane as well?
Games or...
Was he also an airplane?
I don't know. He's one of those guys who looks like every actor of his generation. David Moffat.
Yeah, I love David Moffat. So we have our introduction to the cast now as basically things calm down and they try and figure out what the hell just happened with the Norwegians. They are all basically doing different roles inside of this base, and they're all played by different actors. We mentioned earlier Keith David. He plays Childs, who is a mechanic. Palmer, who is a mechanic and part-time helicopter pilot, who is also a pothead and biker. We have Knowles, the cook. We have Gary, who's the base commander. Gary, the base commander with 2 R's, apparently, not with 1 R. We have Dr. Copper, who is the base doctor. We have Bennings, who is a researcher. We have Fuchs, who is another researcher and biologist. And then we also have, Blair, who is... Sorry, Blair is the doctor. Copper is the biologist and researcher. No, also a doctor. Blair's a biologist. Blair's a microbiologist.
So, and can I point out, like, so it was not intentional, but apparently one of the things that everybody in the 80s thought was really funny was the two of the main characters in this movie. One was named Windows, one was named Mac.
Yeah. And then we have, it's true, yeah. And then finally, and Windows was a choice because his name wasn't originally Windows; it was Sanders.
It was just
and then it was
Windows
Sanchez before that. But he came wearing the glasses and decided he wanted to have an affectation. There's a couple affectations in this movie that are choices by the actors that are really interesting. Like Dr. Copper is this aging man in his 50s and has a nose ring. Yeah. Which is just like, and it's just there. It's never talked about. It's never discussed. No. It's super understated. But he looks like Wilford Brimley, except with a nose ring. It's very interesting how that happens.
And it's, again, well, maybe we'll talk about this at the end when we talk about how it ties to the prequel.
Windows is the radio operator, by the way, and MacReady, our protagonist, is the helicopter pilot. There's a bit of backstory to him in the novelization that he was in the Vietnam War. He has some PTSD, and that's why he drinks so much.
So he's the alcoholic helicopter pilot, not the pothead helicopter.
Not the pothead helicopter.
So you want to decide which of those pilots you're going out with on any given day.
You kind of get the sense early on as they sort of expose to each other that they are a group of misfits who are down here, and that you end up in an Antarctic research station because you're kind of a group of strays. This is not a place you want to be, and winter is about to fall.
The storm is literally coming.
The storm is literally coming, and once winter happens in the Antarctic, it gets dark and it stays dark, and no one's going anywhere for months and months and months and months and months. Boom. Yeah. Boom. Dun 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 dun. So as they discuss what's happening, the Dr. Copper convinces MacReady that they need to check on the rest of the Norwegian camp. They discover the location of the camp. They convince Gary to let them fly out in a helicopter and check on them to see if they're okay. The fun fact here is that as they arrive, they basically are armed because everyone was crazy. MacReady is worried that something bad's going to happen.
Well,
so they're shotgun.
They already shot somebody.
He has a shotgun. He also has a Coleman lantern that I managed to acquire several years ago and have been fixing up because I want that guy's Coleman lantern. I want to have the MacReady lantern in this scene.
Doesn't count if you don't have the hat too.
I don't have the sombrero. Yes, he wears a sombrero in this, which is very strange. So they fly out to the Norwegian camp. They arrive. It is in shambles, as you talked about earlier. It had been burned down, and they use the Outpost 31 set for the burned down Norwegian set. And they discover the Norwegians have had a very bad time. There are a ton of incredible practical effects for this. There's a man who slit his wrists, and it's all frozen to a chair.
Yeah.
There's axes stuck indoors. There's just chaos. The place looks like it has been through an absolute storm of something. And as they progress through the base, they find finally a room with a massive block of ice that has had something carved out of it, that something has escaped from this block of ice. And then as they walk outside, finally, as they're about to leave, the doctor's collecting research, and he finds a VHS recorder that he takes with him. They find a smoking pile of what they thought was just trash that is actually the fused together remains of what looks like several men all melted and conjoined.
The smoking pile of Norwegians.
The smoking pile of Norwegians. And so MacReady says, "Get me a shovel," and they tarp it up, put it in the helicopter, and fly it back to the base.
So the thing that's amazing to me about this is, when you watch Aliens and they first get to LV-426.
Right.
Something horrible has happened there. This is so much worse than that. It is graphically worse than that. It leaves less to the imagination, but there's still no way at the time to kind of work your way logically backwards through what's happened.
Yeah.
It's grim.
It's funny how this has become a staple. The identity stealing monster has become a staple in horror. It was not a staple at this point. It was something that was relatively new. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, I think, was 70 something. Would probably be the last time there was an alien invasion movie that was kind of like this, but you don't have any indication that that's what it's going to be.
Well, and Body Snatchers was different too, right? Because the whole thing was just an allegory for communism.
Communism, yeah.
The most of its time thing ever.
Yeah. We should think about doing that one, actually.
Yeah.
It has the best Leonard Nimoy, I think, of all time, because you don't expect him to be a slick-talking, smooth, debonair man. So
apparently you haven't listened to his albums then, because that's totally what I expect.
I guess that's true. He's kind of the Leonard Cohen of Leonard Nimoy's. So anyway, they fly back. Gary orders an autopsy of the Norwegians as well as of this cadaver that they bring in, the smoking cadaver. And day one concludes. We now get to night number one. The Norwegians appear to be normal. The autopsy completes with Wilford Brimley being an absolute cowboy throughout this entire scene. He does not care at all. This is an actor. He is now arm deep in actual organs that they use to like do this filming. Apparently, it's all just like is animal meat, basically. But he is completely unfazed by all of this.
This is Charles Dance as Tywin Lannister just dressing the deer while he's talking to another actor. Like it's that.
Yeah, 100%. You can tell this person has done this before, and it is not a problem for them. They're just doing their laundry.
It's funny. It's the moment that you're the most aware that he's acting.
Yeah.
Because apparently, like he was just like, yeah, whatever. I'm a cowboy. I'll do this.
This will be fine.
But he has to act like he's
he has to pretend he's feeling sick. Yeah. It's actually later when he does the autopsy on the dogs, I think, that he really sells the
That's it.
Where he starts to groan, he's like, like he makes these like Wilford Brimley noises that you can tell he wouldn't have actually made in real life.
No.
So now night descends. Knowles and Palmer are jerking it to an 80s like TV game show, which I think is very funny, and smoking an enormous amount of marijuana. While Palmer goes, I know how this one ends, and goes and changes the tape.
And that's the best thing, right? Like none of us think about that because we're so used to like the internet.
Right.
And the idea that no, you guys went into the middle of nowhere, you brought like a dozen VHS cassettes with you, and you're gonna watch them every day until you leave this place.
For months and months and months. And Palmer, there's a whole bit of a novelization about why they do it, but Palmer's and Childs are addicted to game shows, basically. Yeah. It's like their favorite thing ever, and there's like this like super short scene where they do this. There is a deleted scene where you discover they grow up, as I said earlier, and the fate of Fuchs, but it's kind of irrelevant to the main plot. The men are playing cards and drinking beer in the rec room, and things are generally sort of quieting down. Bennings, interestingly, is the one that tells Clark to put the dog in the kennels after the dog starts wandering around the base. This is going to be revealed to be like super relevant later on.
But the dog is right. Is everything's fine.
Everything's fine.
This is that moment in the movie where we're everything's fine.
I think we forgot to introduce Clark. Clark's the dog handler. Clark is. I don't think I mentioned Clark at the beginning.
I don't even remember that was his gig. It makes sense.
He is the dog handler.
But yeah,
he's the vet and dog handler because they have a team of sled dogs in case everything breaks down, so they can get out. The sled dogs in the book are their emergency escape hatch for if they run out of fuel, if all the engines break down, if everything freezes.
So as long as the dogs are fine, everything's fine.
Everything's fine. Everything's great. The dog is then put in the kennel. This Norwegian dog is put in the kennel with the remaining dogs. And this is the moment where things...
This is also my other moment where I realized how good as a performance animal this dog is. Because they put the dog in the kennel with the other dogs. And this sounds like not a big deal, but there's a very long shot of the dog standing motionless, staring. It's not doing anything. It's not doing any dog things.
Yep.
And I know that sounds silly, but when you watch it, that's literally the moment where you're like, this dog is not okay.
And later on, you realize the dog does become a prosthetic. It becomes a sculpture of a dog. But as it enters the room and sits down, it's a real dog.
It's a dog.
It's just a real dog and does nothing. So it holds this pose long enough that they then replace it with an identical replica of it.
Yeah.
That then becomes...
But it's amazing. Like there's no panting, there's no sniffing, there's no slight head movements.
Sits.
Like it's Robert Patrick.
It's the Terminator.
It's Robert Patrick.
In Terminator 2, that's right, yeah. It turns into dog Robert Patrick.
Oh my God, I wish I could have dog Robert
Patrick. We all wish that. He was John Doggett in the X-Files.
This is true.
He was John Doggett.
Hey man, nice shot.
He doesn't need... John Doggett doesn't need any of this. He just wanted to clean his gun and watch NASCAR. So the dogs have a bad time. The wind noises are so on point in this scene because right before everything erupts into chaos, we get this eerie, quiet, nothing but the wind outside moment.
And it's constant.
I want to point out how good this sound design is. As someone who's worked in the Arctic and lived in areas where there is basically no ground cover. There's no trees.
There's no windbreaks.
There's no windbreaks. It's flat. You hear this droning constantly. And we mentioned earlier in the sound design how any minute noise becomes off-putting and jarring.
Any interruption in that white noise background is it's incredibly noticeable. If you've ever lived in a place where that's a thing, it's, you notice instantly when there's any interruption of that thing, any disruption of that thing.
And this is one of those moments where I realize this movie is so for me because I realize that, but it also makes me connect with the director because the director clearly understood that as part of like setting the stage to the movie. It's the same way that having everything go silent in a space film does that as well, right? Like I think one of the incredible piece of sound design that's in science fiction like this is when you watch the Battlestar Galactica TV show, and whenever they go to space, there is no audio except for the radios. Like you can hear the radios between, but like even when they're shooting at each other, you're just hearing the reloaders from inside the ships. There's no actual like noise, and then the drum beat starts with the music.
It's interesting because one of the reasons this movie got panned initially on release by critics was people simplified it down to like just a straight gore fest, and that sort of thing. And the distinction between a good, well done movie or TV show and a poorly well done movie or TV show to me are these little things. Yeah, because when you can't be bothered to get the little things right, it makes you very aware you're watching a movie or watching a TV show. And when you get these little details right, that's when you can really immerse yourself in it, no matter how over the top the actual narrative is. Yeah.
And so we start to like ramp up the tension in this moment, and it explodes suddenly as this dog splits open. There's this incredible moment where it attacks the rest of the dogs. There's some interesting filmmaking points in this one. A lot of it was done in reverse. Whenever there was these tendrils lashing out of the dog and reaching out and grabbing the other dogs, what they would do is they would wrap the other dogs, pull the tendrils off them, and then in post-production reverse the shot. So when it looks like these tendrils are spilling out of the thing, they're actually being retracted. Yep. And it's all done practically. All of these effects are practical. They're mind-blowing. The dogs are all assaulted, and Clark runs in hearing this chaos. Immediately is also confronted by the thing that this dog is turning into, slams the door shut, locks it, and goes and gets the rest of the men. They show back up. Clark says my favorite line of the entire movie, which is, I don't know what it is, but it's weird. It's pissed off to McCready. And
he's not wrong.
No,
he's not wrong.
And McCready sends Knowles off to get Childs. Childs is getting dressed in his room because he was asleep as the alarm gets pulled. Actually, I think it's maybe McCready that discovers it with Palmer or with Clark. But regardless, Knowles comes running in and says, Fuchs comes running in and says, Mac wants the flamethrower. And Childs goes, what? I don't know. He just says, get to the kennel with the flamethrower. And we realize that these men have access to some pretty interesting equipment. Now, I want to take it aside for a second. It's not actually weird for men in Arctic places to have what would have actually been called a tiger torch. It wouldn't be called a flamethrower. They're usually propane-powered or gas-powered torches. They're used to de-ice aircraft and warm engine blocks in extreme cold conditions, so you can actually start your vehicles. Otherwise, vehicles won't start. Everything will congeal, and your engines won't turn over.
So I think what makes Child's reaction interesting is, imagine if you woke up and somebody said, grab your reciprocating saw and come to the basement. You'd be like, what? Like, this is a tool. I have this tool. That part's okay, but what the hell's going on? What am I doing?
Immediately starts putting his long johns back on, but he has a look of absolute panic on his face. They show back up. All the men are now kind of like outside the kennel. The dogs have gotten kind of quiet, and as they open the door, they realize that this Norwegian dog has split open into some kind of beast and has like trapped all the other dogs kind of like in these like tendrils. And the men begin attacking this monster. They shoot it several times. Clark panics because he doesn't want to shoot the actual dogs.
It's his dogs, yeah.
It's his dogs. And as they go to burn it with this giant tiger torch, this set of arms reaches up, smashes planks up into the rooftop, and pulls itself out. A big chunk of it basically leaves while they kill the rest of the dogs. And
this is for your various thing theories and for a number of things that'll happen later. This is an important realization because they are torching, burning, shooting this thing.
Yep.
And it doesn't get away. Part of it gets away.
Yeah, this is an important kind of distinction. And two of the dogs came running out of the kennel actually after they opened the door. These dogs are taken basically by Clark and like tended to, and their wounds are healed.
They're fine.
They should be fine, right?
Everything's fine.
And so the dogs are destroyed. The men assemble and they drive it off, but escapes to the roof. So Act 2 now begins basically with the dawn after this fight between the dogs. So we've had Act 1 where we have our setup. We have it revealed that this thing is some kind of monster and that's infiltrated the base. Blair is now autopsying the dog monster in the morning of the second day. It's mostly silent scene, and again, Brimley just eats. He's just chewing the scenery in this one. He's so great. He's doing everything with his Wilford Brimley noises. He's going, and that leads to thing theory number 2 with Blair. So Blair is Wilford Brimley. He is the biologist that's studying this thing as he conducts this autopsy. He's also a doctor. He is tapping the monster with the back of his pencil and then touching his lower lip with his pencil, basically all through this. And this is an important moment in thing theory.
He's also not like you would expect in any kind of more current, recent alien autopsy thing. He is not covered. Like
no,
he's
got some latex gloves on. That's it.
Yeah.
He's got suspenders. That's it. He's got
his suspenders.
He's always got his suspenders on.
So he's fine.
He's booted and suspended at all times. That's a Brimley guarantee. He's gonna have his suspenders on.
It's a good way to catch the diabetes.
So yeah, Blair touches the dog monster with the pencil and immediately then touches his lips with it. This could be where he is now infected. Clark is a pale, hollowed-eyed ghost of himself, and it's shot like it. Basically, as he was the person that was kenneling the dogs and was alone with the dog quite a bit, he's kind of portrayed now as being this haunted individual.
Yeah, he's basically got 1,000-yard stare from here until he doesn't.
Yeah, and after the autopsy, when they say that this is not dog, this is potentially going to be like something that was copying the dog. There's a scene between Blair and Clark where he asks how long was he alone with that dog. They begin watching the Norwegian VHS tapes, and it eventually shows that there is a ship being unearthed out of the ice, that their research had led them to discover something. They are ordered to get on the helicopter, and a bunch of the men, including Gary, fly out now to where this spot was that they kept going back to over and over again and investigate. They come back having discovered these chunks of alien metal and a ship. This is an incredible moment done almost entirely with a matte painting and forced perspective shooting.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about good effects, this is one of the classic Hollywood camera tricks where you actually get fooled.
When I was watching this with Christine, she had a moment where she was like, this green screen looks weird. And I'm like, that's because it's not green screen.
Yeah, that's because they rappel down the side of a glacier and they shoot that. And then they superimpose a matte painting of this like dug up spaceship over top of it. And it looks incredible. The matte paintings in this are so well done. So Norris confirms the ice that they are now standing on is probably at least 100,000 years old. So this ship has been trapped in the ice for at least 100,000 years, and the Norwegians have dug it up. The men return to camp, and everyone who has to rationalize that there's parts of an alien spaceship out there. They contemplate its shape-shifting. Knowles interrupts with an accusation that someone has thrown out dirty laundry in the kitchen. They discover some burned-out dirty laundry.
And it's, it is dirty, but
it's torn up too.
It's torn up, and those stains aren't normal looking stains to me.
Not normal looking stains. Blair is now brooding over his computer as he studies the cellular infection the alien is capable of. His budget Hal tells him there's a 75% chance that someone in the room is infected. Apparently there's an AI in this computer. I love this 1980s computer where everyone thinks computers are just magic.
It's a Commodore.
You can just ask
it's a Commodore PET that still can do everything.
It's Mother from Alien. Like you can ask a computer a question, it'll just spit out a statistic. Yeah. He types in a bunch of other questions, and then what are the chances that someone in the base is also infected? It says, well, 79%, and from there, it'll completely infect the rest of the world within 27,000 hours.
Which is 3.5 years or something.
This is the apocalypse moment.
Yes.
Of it, is that everyone on Earth is going to get infected by this thing if it gets out. Wilford then gets his gun. He is also 2/3 of the way through a bottle of Smirnoff at this point, which is our second piece of product placement. Oh, yeah. He is so everyone is heavy drinking or smoking copious amounts of marijuana in this movie.
They're coping.
Yeah, McCready is also drinking alone in the rec room, surrounded by Revel model kits, which I think is very interesting, and a copy of Gone Too Far. There's some really interesting stuff in the background if you look at this scene. He is burned through his J&B and is watering it down with some Coors. He is not following, as I said earlier, the 24 hours bottle of throttle rule for pilots.
See someone. Just see someone.
He has been flying drunk this entire time. Windows and Bennings get a message from him to get things out of storage as Blair has ordered the cadavers locked up. So Blair's basically said all these bodies need to be locked up. Fuchs whisks Mac aside after the talk with him and quietly outside. Windows says that they should burn these bodies, but Bennings says it will win someone the Nobel Prize. He leaves and Bennings is alone with the corpse that then begins to ooze. Fuchs is concerned about Blair and is taken to reading his notebooks. He asks McCready to go outside into one of the crawlers with him. Basically says that Blair is maybe going crazy, but also believes that these bodies are not dead yet and that they could still be alive.
Blair is either the craziest or the least crazy, and nowhere in between those two things.
Yeah. As they go to leave, they watch someone running out of the helicopter, and we cut back to to Bennings in the room as the corpse begins to ooze. Windows returns and discovers Bennings' ripped clothes, and the corpse is entangled with him. So basically, he comes back into the storeroom, Windows does, and they discover that like Bennings is being taken over by the corpse. The corpse has like entangled him with like a bunch of like tentacles. Windows rushes out and reveals that it has Bennings. It breaks out of a window, and all the men rush out and find him mid-transformation with the best spaghetti fingers effects of all time. He has these like weird like spaghetti fingers. And then he opens his mouth, and instead of being able to say anything, just makes this like alien
I have a mouth
thing roar.
And therefore I scream.
Yeah, it is a fantastic piece of audio. Mac rushes to get the flamethrower, and Gary meets him in a panic, and it dawns on all of them what the stakes are, basically, that Bennings is now a thing. They Bombardier ski dozer. It gets a solid plug in this movie as they create a big vat to burn all of the bodies in. So after they torch Bennings as he's like mid-transformation, they decide everything now has to be burned. Nobody can find Blair as they burn everything down. Max sees Blair run away from the chopper. It has been sabotaged, and he has killed all the dogs as well. Gunshots come from inside, and we find Blair destroying all the radios and having assaulted Windows, who's like collapsed. Windows begins to now have the worst day of his life.
Yeah.
He gets bullied by absolutely everybody.
Congratulations, Windows. You're new Justin.
Yeah, Windows is the Justin of this movie. He so is.
You got picked last for street hockey, son.
Yeah, Windows basically gets bullied 100 times over in this movie, and it starts now with him just being like in a corner with his glasses broken completely.
In a movie where half the characters have been established as being some kind of nerds, he is clearly the beta nerd.
Yeah, he's getting just Wilford Brimley to pieces. So gunshots come from inside, and we find Blair destroying all the radios and having assaulted Windows. Childs tries to talk him down, and he immediately just starts blasting with his pistol at him. No warning. He's just yelling that some of you know what's going on and some of you don't. The men rush in behind a card table and knock him out, with McCready just savagely giving him 3 punches.
Oh, yeah.
It's great.
He just jerseys him once he's on the floor.
Yeah, once they get him on the ground, he gives him, like, you can tell that Kurt Russell has thrown punches for real several times, because he just like punches Wilford Brimley's stunt double.
I like to
savagely.
I like to
because you know that wasn't Brimley in the shot.
And I have nothing to base this on. I like to think that it was Wilford Brimley. And right before the camera started rolling, he said, "Just do your worst. None of you boys can take me anyway."
That's right. And Russell sized him. I was like, "Oh, I better go hard because boys gonna beat my ass otherwise." And actually, I think one of the other cast just goes, "Nice shot, McCready," after they knock him out, which is fantastic. Yeah, they get Blair high on morphine at this point because they know that Wilford Brimley can't be stopped any other way. You have to basically just get him on the nod, otherwise he's going to take you all out. And then they lock him at the tool shed. McCready asks him how he's doing, and Blair tells him to watch Clark because after that scene with Clark, he's not sure about Clark.
Yeah, it's funny because in this moment, as soon as he kind of levels off and they're leaving him behind, he seems, again, that this whole pendulum swing from most crazy to least crazy, he seems completely not crazy.
Yeah, he seems defeated, but not crazy. The men realize they are stuck there now until spring because all modes of transportation have been destroyed by Blair. And that they have to figure out who is who, because otherwise something's going to go wrong.
Which I also think, I'm surprised they never mention this directly in the film, but it's funny to me that like they're stuck there. Nobody brings up the massive amounts of diesel they've been burning to burn these bodies and stuff, right? Because they're clearly burning their resource. Yeah,
they're burning both their generator resource and also the Jet B that the helicopter would have flown on, and probably the diesel. It probably would actually be Jet B. Jet B is jet fuel that's a little more cold resistant because it's part kerosene. So it's like half jet fuel and half kerosene because it doesn't freeze.
But it's just one of those things that I'm like, because like my thought, even the first time I watched the movie, when they fill that pit with, I think it's like 6 55-gallon drums of fuel, I'm like, dude, that's a lot of fuel. Like,
Yep.
I get that you have a lot of fuel, but that's a lot of fuel.
They burn the hell out of those things. So the men realize they're stuck. Gary gets an idea that the doctor gets the idea they could do a blood serum test. Gary gives him
Gary has no ideas.
Gary has no idea. Sorry, Gary's just following the rest of them around as McCready basically takes charge.
He's the leader. He is not the leader.
He's the base commander, but the two doctors and the biologist seem to be in charge. The doc comes with the idea of a blood serum test. Gary gives him the storage keys, and Mac also says to keep an eye on Clark. Fuchs is instructed to read the rest of Blair's journals. And then Copper discovers that all the blood has been destroyed. Windows freaks out and runs away as all the men erupt in an argument as to whether or not the test would have worked and what has happened to this blood. He goes for a gun, at which point his worst day continues as he gets beat up again.
Yeah, he's one of only two characters in the scene with a gun, and he gets the crap kicked out of him.
Yeah.
And also, weird question. So you've locked your guns up. Why have you locked them up behind glass?
I don't know.
That's not secure.
Windows basically goes for his gun and gets his ass kicked by McCready and everybody else again. Why does Copper have the nose ring? This is the moment where Copper's nose ring is the most prevalent. If you guys want to look at it, it's after Windows gets beat up. Everyone argues about who should have Gary's gun because Gary's getting a little squirrely, and it ends up being McCready. They then burn the potentially infected blood, and Mac makes a speech about why he believes some of them must still be human, otherwise they would all rush him right now. He instructs everyone to separate into groups and that they need to tie up Clark, Copper, and Gary, who are the most likely to be infected. The famous tape recorder scene with Mac now happens as night 2 begins, and he discusses the fact that everyone's very tired.
We're all tired.
Yeah.
And no one trusts
anybody, and we're all very tired. Yeah, and it's R.J. McCready, helicopter pilot, USS Outpost No. 31. It's the famous line from the movie. So Act 3 begins as night descends. Fuchs is studying Blair's notes and almost throws a beaker of acid at McCready as he comes in to talk to him. If you're wondering why he reaches for a beaker, apparently it's full of acid to defend himself with. The lights go out and he rushes outside with a flare following an unknown figure. He discovers a scrap of McCready's jacket on the ground after having just talked to him and completely panics. An hour later, McCready's organizing a search for him. The men argue about who goes with who, and Norris is left in charge of the 3 drugged men. Mac does the worst job reassuring people in this scene. He's just keep an eye on everybody else. He just freaks out and becomes equally paranoid. Mac, Knowles, and Windows check on Blair, who is now noose prepping. He's just sitting there eating beans in a can with a noose in the foreground.
This is my favorite scene in the whole movie. Like, because when he comes to check on him, he's like, "Yep. I'm fine.
Yep.
If I wasn't okay before, I'm fine now." And there's just a noose, and it's not in the background; it's in the foreground.
Yeah,
like the noose is between him and them.
He has now changed demeanor for the 3rd time. He was manic, then he was calm and defeated. Now he's just kind of kindly. I'm okay, guys. I'm okay. I'm not going to harm anyone. He says I'm not going to harm anyone 3 times, and it's more disturbing than anything he's done this entire movie.
Yeah, every single movie you've ever seen where some sort of antagonist says, "I'm not going to hurt you," and they're only saying that so they can hurt you.
Yeah.
This is that moment.
When the kindly old man just starts saying, "I'm not going to hurt you," it gets very scary very quickly. He says he won't harm anybody, but they lock him back up anyway. They go to return, but find the burned remains of Fuchs in the snow. So he's disappeared. They give out bullshit theories about Mac and Knowles as to why it could have happened. And then Mac and Knowles go to check why the lights are on in Mac's shack. He sends Windows back inside.
Yep.
But him and Knowles go out to look at what's going on in the shack. And now Thing Theory number 3 happens. And this is where you start to see Norris looking out into the snow waiting for the men to return. And he appears to be having chest pains. He was wearing a flamethrower. He takes it off and starts rubbing his arm and chest. The idea here is that we don't really know when Norris has interacted with anything related materials at this point.
And he has actually probably seemed like the calmest through the whole, and he's not calm.
He's reassuring people.
Like when they're having the argument about who should be in charge because Gary's a screw up, they all choose Norris, and then he says, "Guys, I'm not up to it.
It can't be me. Yeah, I'm not up to it." That's right.
He seems very normal and level-headed.
There is a plant that this could be a payoff to, and this is Thing Theory number 3. That earlier, Fuchs is talking to McCready about having read Blair's journals, and he says, "One of my recommendations is we now all eat out of cans. Only eat sealed food."
Yeah.
Because I don't know who's who, and we know that this thing cellularly metabolizes people. So one of these Thing Theories is that Norris is being consumed from the inside by something he ate. And that's why he's starting to hurt He's not actually assimilated yet because he's still reassuring everybody. And it's not until later on that
And I think the way it's shot is the implication you're meant to take away from it in that moment is that this guy is going to have a heart attack.
That's right.
Like that's from the outside looking in, that's what you're supposed to see.
Yeah. So now, no,
from the outside looking in, I didn't even.
Good one.
We're going to be there in a second.
So Mac breaks the supply. Sorry, Knowles returns and discovers Mac burned clothes. The men immediately turn on him. Palmer spreads panic. Mac tries to get back in, and Palmer wants to burn him right then and there. So as basically they're all outside the door, Palmer and Childs are wearing flamethrowers. Knowles has returned and said that he found in McCready's furnace his burned uniform, the same one we think that Fuchs found earlier.
Yeah.
They immediately say they want to blow him away. The door handle starts to turn. We know it's McCready returning. He's asked them to let them in. And as they all argue about whether or not to open the door, we hear a window smash. And it's McCready breaking in from outside through a window to get in one of the storerooms. We have probably the most iconic scene in the movie now, as they all rush to the storeroom with the flamethrower, and we see a almost frozen McCready, completely covered in frost, just holding 20 sticks of dynamite, and he goes, "Go on, Childs, burn me."
20 sticks of dynamite and a flare.
And a flare. Go on, Childs, burn me.
Once again, much like Event Horizon, where's OSHA? Where's OSHA in this movie?
Yes. Norris tries to jump him and then immediately has a heart attack. They untie Copper and rush him to Norris, but it all goes immediately insane. As Copper tries to resuscitate Norris, we have to remember this guy's still high on morphine at this point too, because they've all been drugged and locked to the couch. The chest cavity of Norris opens into a giant
as he's defibrillating him
and bites off both of Copper's hands in one of the most disturbing scenes of the entire film.
Now we're on the inside looking out.
So what's interesting, and this is why I think Thing Theory number 3 holds some weight. They go to burn. McCready goes to burn this this monster that Norris has turned into, and a monster leaps out of his chest cavity up to the sky that has Norris's face, but is deformed into a worm mentality. And while Norris's body burns, his actual head starts to detach and slide off. So he has two heads, one that came from inside him, and one that is sliding off of his body onto the ground, which becomes the cutest of all thing monsters, which is the spider monster later on.
The Spider Norris.
The Spider Norris is my favorite monster of the entire film. Its tongue drags it across the ground in an incredible practical effects shot. You remember all this is being done practically, and they burn this monster. I think this is probably I would say the most iconic monster fight of the entire movie.
I think so. I think this and the dog are probably it, and this one is more significant. But it's also the moment that reinforces the idea that because he's burning on the table, the head comes off, the thing jumps out of his chest. This is reinforcing what we touched on earlier, what we're about to come to in big style, which is that it's a part of a thing. Yeah.
And Kurt Russell is totally willing to set the entire base on fire, which I think is very funny. So now we have probably the most memorable piece of science fiction of this film, which is the blood test scene. Kurt Russell has devised his own way of testing who is a thing and who isn't, which is to light...
Now that we figured out every part of it.
Is a whole. That's right. Yeah. So he is going to create a hot needle, cut some of everyone's blood, and by scraping this burning hot needle, this red hot needle into the blood will have to react. It will try and get away from the needle and not stay next to it, and then that will be able to differentiate who is who and who is not who is a thing and who is not a thing. As we start to do the hot needle idea, Windows is an idiot, and they all take blood with the same knife. So if anyone wasn't infected that gets cut with this knife, now everyone's infected. Although this is said to be a goof by John Carpenter, that they didn't think about the idea that cutting everyone's thumb with the same knife, if someone was infected, they would all of a sudden be infected. He wipes it on his jeans at one point. That's about the most they do to sanitize this scalpel.
Keep in mind, half these characters are doctors.
Yeah. Not Windows, though, apparently, and that's definitely showing at this point. Knowles and Windows are okay, so is Mac as they do the test. Copper and Clark both get negative tests as well. Oh, Clark tries to rush McCready with a scalpel and gets shot in the head by McCready right before Norris actually dies.
And Clark is the one we've assumed through the whole thing
must
infected. Be a thing.
That's right. Childs accuses McCready of murder at this point as well. As they get to Palmer, they're accusing Childs of probably being a thing because he was the only one who could, or Gary being a thing because he could get to the blood. Gary says this doesn't mean anything, and McCready says we'll do your test last, Gary, because you're the only one that could have gotten to that blood. Palmer's blood immediately jumps out of the thing in a
turns into
a column of like monster and runs away from the hot needle. And we now know that McCready's test must work because it just freaks out.
And Palmer starts shaking.
He turns into Melty Man.
He starts shaking and baking.
He turns into Melty Man, which is one of my favorite effects. As he Raiders of the Lost Ark's his face off, splits his head in half, and now Windows has his final bad day moment where he gets ragdolled by Palmer.
Well, you know what's funny? As bad as it is for Windows, the two characters in this scene I feel the worst for are Childs and Gary.
Yeah, because they're tied up next to him.
Because they're tied up right next to him.
Yeah.
Right next to him.
So a fight ensues. Windows is brutally killed by Monster Palmer.
Brutally, but not quickly.
Well, its head splits in half. He bites Windows on the head and then stands straight up and just ragdolls his body around by the neck. So like literally every bone in Windows' body is pulverized, starting from the skull down, like almost immediately. For some reason, Mac's flamethrower just doesn't work. For a second, like it just turns off, just doesn't work. It's been working fine. He must not have pumped it up. Like he must have like super soaker pump it.
Right?
Yeah, like super soaker pump it up. And when he finally does get it work, he torches Palmer. He has to torch Windows because Windows is already starting to change. And Palmer Frankenstein's through the exterior wall of the rec room. Hey. He Kool-Aid Mans his way out of the wall, and it is incredibly funny into the snow, trying to get away from this flame.
I gotta say, for a base in a very hostile environment, the windows and walls don't seem very thick.
You'd think there would be a little more insulation than there is in this rec room wall. He just disappears through this wall. Mac torches everything, and we get probably Gary's one and only best line of the entire movie.
My God, so good. This character that you had no empathy for the whole time.
Yeah. The rest of the survivors all test clean. It was just Palmer basically who was still infected along with Norris. And Gary says, I know you men have been through a lot, but if you wouldn't mind, I don't want to spend the rest of this winter tied to this fucking couch. And it's the one time you've heard him swear at anime in the entire movie, and it's incredible. He just sells the entire thing. There's been no Shakespearean portrayal ever by any of the Royal Shakespeare Company that's been better than Gary delivering this one line, tied, drugged to a couch. It is high art. Realizing that they're all going to freeze, they go outside to test Blair to see what is going on with him. He's the last person they haven't tested. We have to realize that there is only several men left at this point. There is Childs, Gary, Mac, Knowles, and Blair, the 5 remaining men.
Yeah.
Maybe it was 9 men. I think I said 8 at the beginning. That's why I forgot to mention Clark, because there's a great many dead people at this point.
Clark is only important when other characters mention him, so he's a bit of a weird character that way.
Yeah, he's just there to be suspicious, basically.
Yeah.
Look hollow and haunted. They go outside and go to look, and Blair's not in the cabin. He's not in the tool shed anymore. They do discover, however, that several boards on the ground have been loosened, and that Blair's been working on something in the basement. Sure looks a lot like a flying saucer.
It looks like a Marvin the Martian flying saucer.
It does. It's not very big, but it's been cobbled together piece by piece by the piece of machinery that Blair had sabotaged. And in the novelization, they kind of discuss how it looks like it wasn't probably going to fly, but it was like a rocket that would propel something to the coast. The idea being that it would want to get into the local wildlife, or get to a penguin or something, get to the ocean and be able to escape.
Penguin bastards.
The men return to find Childs missing as they left him behind, and they blow up the shack. The lights then all go out and the generator dies. The entire camp goes black. Realizing that they're going to die and that this thing's trying to now freeze, Mac, Gary, and Knowles begin to destroy the entire camp to prevent this escape. The final scene with the 3 men is them going down to the generator room and discovering the generating is gone. Not that it's been damaged.
Gone, not destroyed.
Gary, who has, by the way, the coolest headlamp ever, which is just like a duct taped flashlight to his head, which makes me so happy. He asks if they can fix it, and he just goes, "It's gone, McCready." They set dynamite and charges all around the camp. They intend to bring the entire thing down into the ice to kill this thing. Gary is killed in the greatest way ever as Wilford Brimley reappears. He sticks his hand in Gary's mouth and just spreads his fingers inside of it to prevent him from making any noise and kills him. Like just crushes
He jaws of life him, basically.
It is jarring and disturbing to watch Wilford Brimley do this. And once again, Wilford Brimley being the greatest, he sells this entire thing with a completely deadpan serious look on his face, which is incredible.
And it's literally it's only moments after. For the first time in this movie, you thought, oh, maybe Gary's not so bad.
He's not so bad. He's okay. And yeah, he gets killed by Wilford Brimley in the most interesting way, I think, of the entire film.
Yeah.
We have no idea what happens to Knowles. He just disappears, and McCready finds himself alone in the generator room, which is below ground, basically, with the detonator, which, and probably one of the best audio moments. There is dead silence as he calls out for his friends, and then he slowly raises the pump handle on the detonator for this dynamite, and it makes these like incredibly slow clicking noises. The Blair Monster is finally revealed. It's not just Blair anymore. It is under the base. All of the floorboards and ductboards go up. All of the bombs are basically dragged underground, including the detonator, where McCready can't get to it, so he can't blow up the base. And we have Mac's greatest line of probably the movie, which is, as the Blair Monster, which is enormous, rears up, roars at him. He lights a stick of dynamite, does the best ninja roll ever. He does his one. It is the most Escape from New York roll ever. Yes. He does a Snake Plissken roll basically in this, which I think is fantastic. And then looks at the monster holding this burning stick of dynamite and goes, yeah, fuck you too, and just throws it at him, and then dives out of this basement as the entire camp explodes. And so we have our final scene of the entire film now. The camp's on fire, everything's burning, everything's destroyed, everything's blown up, and Childs reemerges from the snow. The two confront each other. McCready says it doesn't really matter what's happened or whether or not you're a thing. If we have any surprises for each other, if we have any surprises for each other, I don't think any of us are in any shape to do anything about it. Why don't we just sit here and see what happens? They both take a drink, and this leads to...
Only one of them takes a drink.
Sorry,
right?
One of them takes a drink. One of them's holding a bottle, a J&B bottle. The other one takes a drink, which is Child's. And this leads to our final thing theory of the movie in two parts. The first part is one of the men is copiously steaming. Breath is steaming from their mouth. We talked earlier about the fact that this was a clear choice by the director.
Yeah.
Because they were on a not freezing soundstage, and Kurt Russell was having to smoke cigarettes to blow out the smoke. To basically
so
make
it looks like
breath.
his frosted breath is actually cigarette smoke.
Yeah,
that's how they accomplish.
Keith David has no visible real puffing of any kind of breath from his body. The second thing is that the two men had been creating Molotovs to throw around the camp to burn everything down throughout the final act of the film. And as McCready hands this bottle to Childs, it is most likely not actually a bottle of J&B, but actually a Molotov that he created earlier, and that Childs takes a drink from it and does not react, meaning that he is most likely a thing and infected because he is drinking jet fuel. He is not drinking J&B, and the thing wouldn't know the difference.
And I think your reinforcement for the fact that it is almost certainly fuel is just the fact that McCready's not drinking it. It would be the first time in the entire movie where he could be drinking and he's not.
He's not humming something down.
Now, if I can just call out, so that's the theory within the context of the movie.
Yeah.
The one thing that I want to mention, because a lot of fans have addressed this online, is their proof that Childs is not infected,
right,
is that he still has his earring.
Yeah.
Because in the prequel movie, they established that the thing can't replicate any of these things. So like they are always finding things like gold fillings or like any kind of like medical internal surgical apparatus.
They really seize on all the jewelry the men have in the prequel film.
But I think the important thing to remember when you're watching this is that was never established in this movie. So that might be a fact in the prequel movie. It's not actually a fact in this movie. So the idea that he still has his earring in, which you can clearly see in the last shot, doesn't actually mean that he's not the thing.
And so that leads us to the end of our synopsis of this film. Now remember, all of these thing theories are just points of interest. Yeah. There is no conclusive end of this debate, and it is always intended to be by the filmmaker ambiguous as to who is or isn't a thing. Even like Keith David has basically been living off this movie now for the last 40 years. 40 years. This movie's 41 years old.
So whatever you think of anything we've said today, I think the important thing to remember is that you can go down into the comments section, argue with each other and us like you're very tired, and you don't trust
anyone. You don't trust anyone. That is the enduring message of this film. But I was going to say, Keith David has espoused a bunch of theories online, has his own interpretation of it. Kurt Russell has his own interpretation of it. Carpenter has given his own interpretations of this in interviews. But it will end up being one of the most debated things you're
absolutely,
absolutely,
and satisfyingly so.
I think so as well. So there, we've done it. We've completed our journey. The ruins of our research station are burning around us. We are slumped on the ground, possibly drinking jet fuel.
I'm gonna have my whiskey jet fuel.
That's right. And as the fires basically cast shadows on the wall, we have our final moment of of discussion and reflection on whether or not this was this a Revel model kit that we brought with us to entertain us over the course of this? Was this a VHS recording of an 80s game show? Or was this a piece of horticulture lovingly grown by Knowles and Palmer to entertain us? Yeah, lovingly trimmed
like
and
a bonsai.
That's right, like a bonsai tree. And then flash frozen as the roof was caved in. So this is art or is this a product?
Gallery to the left, gift shop to the right. Have your tickets ready for the Dark Exhibition.
All right, so the Dark Exhibition is the segment in which we talk about whether this is art or product. Where does this fall on the spectrum for us? And if you want the definition of that, of course, you can go back in Grimdark Media and talk about a whole segment where these things aren't good or bad. They're not qualifiers for quality. You can have great things that are products. You can have fantastic things that are art. You can have garbage things that are attempting to be art. You can have garbage things that are attempting to be products. But in this case, where do we think the thing sits in the spectrum of art versus product?
So, I've had an interesting realization about myself as we've been talking about this, because anybody who knows me knows I hate defining something by what it isn't.
Sure.
But every time we talk about art versus product, that's what I keep coming back to.
Okay.
So I'm going to say the thing is art. And the main reason is, to what I just said, when I think about whether or not it's art or product, I'm always thinking about the choices that could have been made that would have made it the other thing.
Right.
So in my case, I look at this, and again, when you go back to 1982 when this was released, if you wanted this to be a more successful product, there would have been way less gore. Like by today's standards, it's not super gory, but by the standards of 1982, like it got ripped apart by the critics for its level of visual gore.
It was called schlocky alien.
Yeah.
They said it was just alien with gore instead of substance.
So there's that. So that's the first part for me, is there's choices. You could have also removed all the ambiguity, which would make the movie far less interesting, but probably far more commercially successful.
Absolutely, yeah.
So those are the first 2 points for me. The second thing in terms of defining it as art is all the decisions that were made in the movie. So we talked at the start about the sound. Like, if you were just trying to get the masses to go to a movie, you didn't have to invest as much in that. You didn't have to make it as much a character in the movie. We actually talked before off camera about the fact that when they go out to see Dr. Brimley the second time, and he talks about how he's been hearing strange things. Anything you hear outside of that howling wind, white noise is a strange thing. Like, you're not in a house, you're not in the city. There aren't all kinds of different sounds happening around you all the time. So these are all conscious layers that have been added on to the movie that you didn't have to add on if you were just trying to sell tickets to the average 14-year-old in 1982.
Yeah, so, there is not a hint of commercialism in this movie.
No.
There's no hint of happy ending. There's no hint of like hero's journey. And it's worth noting that this is an adaptation, right? This is an adaptation of Who Goes There, a short story about an Arctic expedition that runs afoul of an alien. It is not the same narratively, but it uses character names that are the same, and the themes of isolation and the unknown are picked from this sort of like mid-century Arctic tale, where there is a film adaptation. Originally, it was The Thing from Another World. It's a bit closer to what the Who Goes There is as far as like a narrative and story-wise, and the characters themselves. But this is an original adaptation of this idea updated for modern age.
This is very much John Carpenter's vision.
Yeah.
Of what he wanted to make, and that to me by definition is art.
Yes. I think so. I 100% agree with you. I think this is art. I think the reaction to it initially and the reaction to it afterwards are what show that. I think if this movie had been made today by A24, it would be one of the most critically acclaimed movies of all time. I think that this movie being made in 1982, where its contemporaries are the big blockbusters just being invented, that a certain amount of commercialism was baked into films and spectacle was baked into films, and the contemporaries being Ridley Scott and Steven Spielberg, you have a very different expectation on the street as to what an art indie movie should be versus reality. And I think that the expectations being different on this movie at the time, you would have had a different reaction. And because it became so successful in syndication, VHS, and later on DVD, and now through streaming, and it's so wildly regarded in its later years, shows that the filmmaker achieved a reaction from people that wasn't commercial. It was emotional, it was sensory, and that's where I think art falls for me. That's why it's been so enduring when so many other films of 1982, while they are well regarded and they're commercially successful, don't get watched today the way that this one does.
I think, and we've talked about this before, but I think part of it is when you look at something as an original piece of art versus being a commercial product, which it tends to be a little bit more derivative, one of the things that really informs that is the fact that it has inspired other people since then.
Yeah.
And the fact that, whether or not this is far enough back in the timeline to create a trope, but 40 years later, how many filmmakers are there that are inspired by this movie?
Yeah, absolutely. How many, and how many times does this movie get referred to as a benchmark in relation to other things? How many episodes of science fiction TV have done an homage to The Thing? Right. There's an early season X-Files episode called Ice that is basically just The Thing. There is so many moments where there are these replacement sort of like idea films or tropes that harken back to this film as their inspiration. And there's so many things that have sound design ideas pulled from this, where isolation is given to you audibly as opposed to visually, right? Like how crazy is it that we are given a presentation of a group of 9-10 men, and they have each other, but they feel like they are all alone and isolated from each other. That is a accomplishment to do in visual storytelling.
And I think one of the things that also speaks to commitment to producing something of quality, to producing something with artistic merit as opposed to something consumable. Again, you can look at Keith David, or you can look at Kurt Russell in a contemporary context.
Right.
But if you go back to 1982, there's no stunt casting in this movie.
No.
And the movie at every level is incredibly well performed. Like, everyone's emotional reactions to what's going on around them are incredibly believable and grounded in an incredibly not believable and grounded situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So where the time and the care has been spent on this, you can tell that someone cared about what they were making, and they were making it. Obviously, they were making it hoping it would be consumed by the masses, but they were making it for themselves. They were making a thing they were going to be proud of. And I mean, you mentioned at the start the fact that this is his personal favorite, Carpenter's personal favorite movie. Of course it is.
Of course it is. Yeah, it's the one where he did what he wanted, even though it didn't succeed and it almost cost him his career. Yeah. You know how old the effects coordinator was, did all the practical effects when he made this movie?
No idea.
22 years old.
Sounds about right.
Could you imagine being 22 years old and making The Thing, and doing the practical makeup and effects for The Thing? That's insane.
Well, I think what's interesting...
That's insane.
I think what's interesting...
I couldn't make spaghetti when I was 22 years old.
I think what's interesting about it to me, right, is like when you talk about somebody who's like a veteran and has tons of experience doing these things versus somebody who doesn't, when you're going to do something that no one's done before, you don't need somebody with experience because there's nobody who has the experience doing what you want done. Yeah.
And also sometimes you need to not believe something is or isn't possible and just be naive.
Yeah. And
to make something like The Thing. It's incredible. So we've basically, the fires are starting to go out. We are now sort of like left to drift off into our own thoughts as to the nature of humanity, and as we reflect basically on the themes of this film, as the grim darkness descends, we are locked in prisons of our own minds, start to doubt our own sanity and our existence as what's human. We find ourselves in the grim asylum.
As night descends, we scratch our messages into the walls. Future warnings for inmates of the Grim Asylum.
All right, so in this segment, The Grim Asylum, we talk about the grimdark themes that persist in grimdark media. Now, they don't all have to be present in a given piece of media, but what we like to do is pick up our top 3 that we felt is what put this in the camp of this sort of like genre of being grim and dark. And so we'll start with you, we'll go back and forth,
Sure.
And if we pair up on one, we'll talk about it.
So the first one I went with was actually, and it's funny because I went back and forth on this or the opposite of this. I went with deathlessness.
Okay.
All of the main characters, well, all of the characters in this movie die.
Yeah.
But that doesn't at all feel like the theme. It almost feels like that whole "why won't you let me die?" Right? Like you've taken me, you're wearing me as a skin suit, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. But the thing persists. Like it lived frozen under the ice for 100,000 years. They even reference in the movie that it's no longer trying to win. It's just trying to go back to sleep.
Yeah.
Let them die off, and then it'll come back when the rescue team comes, right? Yeah. It's not a theme of like infinity to me. It's a theme of deathlessness.
Yeah. I went with endlessness for kind of the same reasons, that there's this endless threat of this thing. Now that if one microscopic cell of it is on your planet and it encounters any other cell of life on your planet, then this thing will start all over again. Then no matter what these men did, some tiny little speck of this thing's going to get lost in the ice, and a penguin's going to encounter it, or a fish is going to encounter it in 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 years, and this cycle is going to start all over again. That endlessness feeling, when you're standing in the crater and Norris is like explaining the backscatter effect has been bringing things up for at least 100,000 years. Like this ice is at least 100,000 years old. And you realize that opening scene with that terrible flying saucer was 100,000 years before what you've just witnessed as the events at Outpost 31. You realize that this thing is patient. It doesn't need to win right now.
No.
And in fact, with all it needing to have is a single cell to start this replication process over and over and over again. As you witness in Blair's computer, one cell is 10 cells by the time the simulation ends. Nothing about this is anything but inevitable. This is an inevitable foregone conclusion. And this organism being on Earth now, there's an endless threat that will never go away of what it's going to do. So that was my first. That was my version of what you said. That was my sort of first. We
got to two different themes, kind of on the same road.
Yeah. Well, the other sort of palette for that with me was the fact that they are in this Antarctic environment, and it's funny how you can feel so isolated in such an open environment and place. The endlessness of the ice, of the sky, of the night. Like Carpenter does this thing where he does these like punched out long distance shots of things very much on purpose to give you a sense of scale. And so the endlessness of scale, where there's this enormity, and that was my second word, was enormity, was that the location itself is this huge place. So endlessness and enormity are kind of my two themes, because they then give you the last theme that I'll talk about when we go back to me. But the enormity of their situation, both from like the stakes point of view, 27,000 hours from now, the entirety of planet Earth is going to be infected. And also the ice is forever. This thing is forever. There's just this like, we are so small in frame basically compared to what's going on. And the stakes are so big.
So it's interesting because this will be the second time then that we've taken the same material but interpreted it in two different ways.
Okay.
Because I felt all the same things, but for me, less than enormity, it was about the bleakness of it. And one of the things that nothing sold me more on the bleakness of this movie than when they're going to the Norwegian base and you've got the long shot from the helicopter and there's just white everywhere. Like it doesn't look real.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's
you don't understand snow blindness until you see a shot like that.
Right.
About how people can go blind in the snow.
But part of it is, again, what you're talking about. At nighttime, there's endless blackness. During the daytime, there's endless whiteness. They are
high contrast
in a group, but they're completely isolated from the rest of the world, right?
And soon from each other through the events that take place.
And the closest they come to not being isolated from the rest of the world is the closest group of people have all already been killed or taken over by this thing.
Yeah.
So for me, even though you have all of these things, and through most of the movie you have different characters espousing a certain amount of hope, I think ultimately the theme I landed on, the way you landed on in Normandy, for me was bleakness.
Yeah, that's that.
And I'm guessing we're going to have the same last one then.
Yes, I think it's probably going to be pretty obvious that I'm going to go with futility. Yeah, we both picked futility in this one. This is a really common theme, and I find it's almost like the foundation that we keep coming back to is the nothing like the grimness of the grim darkness. The nothing matters. This was a hyper personal story where the stakes were almost entirely individual, and the pride of sacrifice and not letting things happen, even realizing that it didn't matter. Not realizing that no matter what they did, they could bring the whole camp down to the ice. They could burn it all. Someone was going to come looking for them, and this was probably going to all start over again. Yeah. And that ambiguity at the end, I think, really reinforces that futility of everyone died. Like the thing won the minute it was dug out of the ice. Yeah. It had won the minute the Norwegians blasted it up. And everything else is just the accounting of the human cost, basically, that it's now exacting as it creeps slowly closer to taking over this entire planet and infecting everyone on Earth.
So it's interesting because I agree with all of that. And I did go with futility as my third theme. I actually think, and I hate to say this because it's such a, I don't know, hipster kind of thing to say. I think a ton of value is added to this movie by what a financial failure it was. Because the potential problem, I guess I should say, with that idea that the Thing's victory is inevitable and that no matter what they do, it can come back, you can easily see this as a movie that, had it succeeded, would have gotten an annual sequel for 10 straight years.
Probably, yeah.
Right? And the fact that it didn't, and it was not diminished by what came afterwards, I think is a huge part of its legacy. But yeah, I think futility, it never mattered what any of them did. That the very first shot of the movie of the flying saucer approaching Earth, that might as well have been the last shot of the movie.
Yeah.
That might as well have been every shot in between, right? Like nothing that happened between that and the rolling of the final credits at the end mattered at all.
No.
Like to the characters in the moment, with their kind of zoomed in perspective on the world they're living in, it felt like it did. And you're looking at it from their point of view, but none of it mattered. None of it mattered at all.
Well, I want to add something to the end of this now that we've agreed in our final layer. I want to actually add a new emotional palette term that I've searched for in our notes from the previous ones and is super relevant to this film that we haven't actually talked about before, and that's paranoia. Is that looking for the boogeyman that's not there, and that sense of mistrust and paranoia, I think is, and neuroses, I think is an element we may have overlooked in our initial foundation of that. And it's soaking through this entire film. That not knowing who to trust, and that social breakdown, the paranoia of the social breakdown, it happens in dystopias. It is an emotional term that I think comes into play in lots of the other themes that we already have, but we didn't put it in the emotional palette thing. So I'm advocating that we throw paranoia.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we put when we talked about some of the low hanging fruit that you would compare this to earlier, like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, or even something like Fallen, you can kind of see that. But like the best, inspired by this kind of paranoia, don't trust anybody, but there is an outside force applying to me, is Needful Things.
Yeah.
Right? So you can see it through a lot of other things in a lot of other places.
Also, I was going to say 30 Days a Night, that are they outside? Can they hear us? The needing to be quiet, a quiet space, that paranoia of there's that incredible moment in A Quiet Place where the little boy finds the toy and it starts to ring, and there's that slow motion scene of them trying to get it away from him, and then the monster just comes out of nowhere.
Yep.
I feel like paranoia is something that we needed to add because we just didn't have access to it in the lexicon.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna advocate that we throw
I think so.
Sweet. Because that line by McCready, no one trusts anyone anymore and we're all very tired.
Yep.
that is the most hopeless thing to leave in a, well, I guess there needs to be some kind of record of what happened here. Like, but it's also probably the most poignant of all the things he says.
I think it's one of those moments, and I mean, McCready's showed to be flawed from the get-go, but it's one of those things that makes you realize that your protagonist is not a hero. Those two words are not interchangeable.
No, and he's not even necessarily a good man, which is funny because that is the most striking difference between McCready in the source material of the novel and this McCready in the source material of the model is this like golden god. He's this like mountain man, like bronzed, basically like superhuman that everyone refers to as like the blue collar hero that's going to save all these weedy scientists.
Well, and it's funny because I think it's also part of what creates that ambiguity with McCready and Childs at the end, right? Because you're seeing the story from McCready's point of view, right? But when Childs disappears and everything Childs says and how he engages with the group before he disappears, he's just the other McCready. Yeah. Like he really is. Like if you reshot the movie from Child's point of view, it would be a very different movie. But you would have a lot of those same beats about him not trusting people, but it would look different if it's from his point of view instead of from the point of view of somebody who's
because the evidence really against McCready. Like there's not a lot of good evidence for McCready not being infected. Yeah. Right? Like the his clothes showing up everywhere, basically all ripped and torn. The fact that he lives off by himself in a shack while the other men live on the base. Like there's ample opportunity for him to be the villain. Yeah. And in fact, like the fact that he visits Fuchs moments before Fuchs finds his ripped clothing outside and then is immolated or possibly killed with a shovel if you watch the deleted scenes. But like there's all of these moments where like it could just as well be McCready having orchestrated all this, and you can interpret burning down the camp as the thing going back into the ice.
Because if this was a video game, and I realize there have been video games made, but I mean if this narrative with these exact characters, this exact story was a video game, like that kind of second playthrough would be you play as Childs. It totally would be, right? Yeah. And all of that time where Childs has disappeared and is off camera would just be him doing a lot of the same kind of stuff that you see McCready doing when he's by himself.
Mm-hmm. You could have a whole arc with Windows or Norris, who also don't get a ton of camera time and you don't really understand what their journey is. They could be having a side. It could be Gary's entire arc. You know what I mean? Like basically Gary's entire arc is him interacting with Childs for the rest of the movie. I would love that. I would love if someone if you could get like a Jordan Peele to reshoot the thing, but do it entirely from Child's perspective. Yeah. That would be an incredible movie. And like, because it ends at, like, you could have the exact same beat for beat story end in the same ambiguous way, but be interpreted completely differently because it's just following another person through the same events. I think that would be incredible. I would love Jordan Peele, if you ever watch this, I got a pitch. I got a pitch. We got a pitch to do a Thing remake, but do it right. I think it'd be great. And that, and I want his version of Akira. If he does the live action Akira, that'd be fantastic. He put the bike slide in Nope. I don't know if you ever saw that, but they did the Akira bike slide in Nope as an homage to his canceled Akira project. All right, well, the fire's going out. We find a pile of burned Malamute dog skulls out in the ice, so sad, stacked up on top of each other. And we come to our final segment where we have to rank these things up as we find ourselves basically confronted with a frozen throne of skulls.
As the light fades and the end draws near, where does this sit upon the throne of skulls?
All right, so in this segment, we go through all of our previous covered media, and you and I have our own separate lists in which we rank these things back and forth. So without any sort of like preamble, we're going to go bottom to top. We can justify when we agree or disagree if you really want to, where these things land. But we have 7 pieces of media on the list now. I think we skipped a few in different ones, but I think the last one we got right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start. We'll go back and forth. Number 6 for me is still Rangers of Shadowdeep.
Number 7, you mean?
Sorry, number 7 for me. That's right, because we have 7 now, is Rangers of Shadowdeep.
Okay. Number 7 for me is still Last of Us Part 2.
Of course it is. Number 6 for me is Event Horizon.
Number 6 for me is Astartes.
Number 5 for me is Hard Boiled.
5 for me is Event Horizon.
Number 4 for me is Astartes.
4 is where I put Rangers of Shadowdeep.
Number 3 is Call of Cthulhu.
3 is Hard Boiled for me.
Number 2 is The Last of Us Part 2.
Oh, that's interesting. So we're not as far apart on that. So number 2 for me is The Thing.
And my number 1 with the bullets, John Carpenter's 1982 classic, The Thing.
And I've still got Call of Cthulhu as number one, but The Thing is very close.
It was tight, wasn't it? It was tight.
Yeah, I had to think about it.
All right. I love that we were close on that one. I love that we were very close on that one. This is a movie that I watch like very regularly when I want a comforting thing in my life, because it was such a gateway into grimdark media for me. I watched it at such a young age. It had such personal resonance because my dad was a geological mining engineer, and he was working in Greenland when I saw this movie for the first time. He was coming back and forth to Greenland, and the mind worm that this inserted in me every time he would go into the Arctic and come back, as to whether or not it was my dad that came back or it was a thing, has never left me my entire life. It is just one of those things where and then later on, 13 years old, going to work in the Arctic in mining camps, spending tons of time in, like prairie and exposed, like not Arctic, but like winter environments here in Canada. So much of this film resonates with me. Just the isolation, the sound, the noise, the feelings of paranoia. It is an absolute work of art. But again, that's why it's my list, not a definitive list for anybody else.
So when you did mining camps and lived up there, did you have a sombrero?
I did not own a sombrero. No, I did not. I did not see anyone wearing a sombrero either. The sombrero is a affectation. It feels like Carpenter went to each one of the actors and was like, you need to have one weird thing about you that makes you feel real. And they all did. They all had a thing that made Windows has his glasses, Copper has his nose ring, Wilford Brimley has his suspenders, right? The motorcycle jacket on Palmer. Childs has his earring. Like Gary has his like weird army uniform that
Gary
I don't know why he's
like he's
wearing.
in his old job. Yeah, he dresses like a Navy officer.
He dresses like, he still dresses like he's an extra in MASH. You know what I mean? Even though like he's clearly not, or like a deputy, like he's like a Smokey, like he's like a state trooper. You know what I mean? Like he's just like a state trooper. The roller skates for Knowles, where he roller skates around the base.
Yep.
Who else? I think the only one that doesn't kind of is Norris. Like Norris doesn't seem to have any defining personality trait that I can think of, but everybody else has like a quirk, right? The sombrero on McCready.
Oddly enough, the sombrero is the one that feels consciously the most out of place to me. Like it's the other ones, it's like, it's a little strange, but I get it.
Yeah.
The sombrero, it's like,
Copper just being like a doctor of the child of the 60s with his nose ring, I guess, just fits. Like, it's also understated, and yet also, because it's never discussed, but all makes these actors feel so real. You know what I mean? Like, they have like a real, some people would just be weird and different, and that makes them feel like misfits, but it's never talked about or discussed.
No. Because you wouldn't, right? If you'd been working this gig with some dude who was wearing a sombrero in the Arctic for 3 months already, it's not like it would come up every day. And
let me tell you, having worked with people who are willing to go to the Arctic and not see anyone and just make money for 6 to 8 months at a time, they're all like that. I have never worked with anyone who wasn't a cast of characters working at a kind of like exploration mining camp when I was a teenager. They are all larger than life individuals for a variety of reasons, both good and bad. So yeah, there it is. We got our lists. I have a new number one, which I think is exciting. You have a new number two.
I almost had a new number one.
Yeah, new number two, which I think is very cool. And we're on to the next thing. So next thing is literary media. So we're on to literary media next. We've done film, which means I am picking the last one for this month, which is game media. But what's next? What are we doing for book?
So I had an original thought, which you and I talked about, and then realized, unfortunately, my difficult to replace book has disappeared.
It's no longer in print.
So that had to go.
Oh, it's going to come back, but we'll just have to find.
It will come back.
We'll find copies of it.
But I wanted to find something. I wanted to find something that we both had, that I knew we'd both read.
Okay.
That we were both going to be familiar with. I haven't read it since it first came out, but that was different.
Okay.
Different from a format point of view.
Okay.
So I'm picking World War Z.
Oh, shit.
So I am picking a grimdark pseudo-documentary.
Oh, like the Stephen Ambrose of zombie literature.
The Studs Terkel of zombie literature.
Yeah.
And just to be crystal clear, this is my literary pick and will never be my cinematic pick.
No, but should be your audiobook pick. Because if you haven't got the audiobook, you and I both have the audiobook for it too, and that cast is stacked. Henry Rollins, Mark Hamill. Oh my God, the list goes on.
It's so good. But it will be our literary pick, because I'm sure we both have
Oh,
I
I'm
have
so
two
excited.
copies of it because
I
I
have
got it when it
multiple
came out,
copies of it, yeah.
and then I think when they did one of the reprints, they added something to it, and I got that. So
Yeah, I think maybe my first copy that you bought for me. I'm pretty sure because when it first came out, there was definitely a moment where we both listened to it, and then when we were both driving around for work, we would listen to the audiobooks in our cars.
yeah, because when I was driving from Toronto to Ottawa,
Yeah.
it's like I got 5 hours.
Let's listen to Max
whatever I want
Brooks.
to.
Yeah, let's listen to Max Brooks. Okay, so World War Z. If you guys want to listen ahead or read ahead, this is an anthology-based chronicling of the zombie war, done in a Band of Brothers style, where our constant narrator, or constant interviewer, basically interviews a cast of characters who've survived.
And we do bounce back and forth, like we do come back to them, but I can't stress enough, and it's not just a qualitative point of thing in my view, but the movie is at best tangentially connected to the book.
It's less related to the book than the thing is to who goes there.
So if you want to understand what we're actually discussing, you would definitely want to either read the book or listen to the audiobook.
Yeah, never play the game or watch the movie. They are hot garbage. They are not in any way.
They're trying to be marginally more polite than that, but yeah, they're terrible.
They're trash. They are trash. And I like trash. But if you want to watch, actually, I would say a better version of World War Z in film is Black Summer. Black Summer, the Netflix series, is a better World War Z.
Can I tell you my one thing, or you're way off topic?
Yeah, okay.
One thing I like the most about the World War Z movie is Peter Capaldi has a tiny little part in it at the end.
Yeah.
Where he plays a doctor for the World Health Organization.
Yeah.
So in the end credits, Peter Capaldi is credited as Who Doctor.
Oh my God, that's so funny.
That's the kind of dad joke.
You like that kind of like plant. That's the biggest payoff in the whole movie. Well, that's telling that's all you cared about.
That was when after the credits rolled, a guy who was in the movie for 18 seconds was the high point of the movie.
What a garbage film that is. But anyway, incredible book, incredible audiobook. And the audiobook is abridged, so you won't get the entire book if you do the audiobook. Yeah. But that might be a quicker way for those of you who want to catch up and do this.
And it is
beforehand.
highly entertaining. Like I'm typically somebody, I'm old school. Like I want to read a book. I don't want to listen to an audiobook. That audiobook is highly entertaining and it's high quality.
Yeah, if you got some extra credits on Audible or something like that from your Prime subscription, go download it because it'll be on Audible and check it out because it's worth listening to even if you don't want to.
I did both. I read the book and listened to the audiobook and I enjoyed both.
And I enjoyed both. Yeah, you get the main beats of the book. You miss a couple of like entries and stuff like that. I think you missed the dude, the Shaolin guy, the blind guy.
I think the big thing is there's a couple characters where having an actor or voice actor perform it, you get a certain inflection that reading the book lacks because the first time you read the book, you don't know what certain parts of it are building to, right? Like when a character has their first chapter and they're explaining the world that they think they see, and then they have their second chapter much later on, and it's like, yeah, but actually this.
And I love Max Brooks, and this is where he made his bones, so well worth listening. All right, man, that's it. We did another one, and this is another Patron Produced one. So next month's Patron Produced is going to be book, which means that we will put that should be up now at the time of this going out. You guys will be able to be starting to vote on what piece of book media we do for February. And yeah, you get to see, listen, check it out. So if you are a Patreon, go to patreon.com/Guerrilla Miniature Games. You can get your vote in for which Grimdark media that we do. And thank you to all of the patrons who picked this one because once again, you've shown that you are truly our people.
You are our people.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.